Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I want to do my review of Ohio, a novel by Steven Markley, which I just finished reading. And I have to tell you up front before I say anything else, I really enjoyed reading this book, and as tough a time as I had with my reading last month, this book really was kind of a salve to that and helped me get back into reading, and I enjoyed reading it. I'm not sure that enjoyment hasn't somewhat maybe clouded my critical evaluation of the book, but we'll see as we go through. So, the basics of the novel Ohio is it's a story set in small town Ohio, a town in Ohio that's been kind of devastated by the move away from industrialization. It's a town in which drug use has gone up, unemployment has gone up, people have transitioned from good-paying factory-style jobs to not-so-great-paying service jobs, in which young people and their parents alike are kind of struggling for meaning. The story revolves around really a group of about 10 friends. There are lots of characters in Ohio, I'll say that up front. A group of about 10 friends from high school and the aftermath of their lives after high school. So there are a lot of flashbacks to their high school days, and there are a lot of time periods in which you're in more or less present day, around 2017, and sometimes you're somewhere in between. And to be honest with you, the chronology of Ohio can be a bit confusing, as can any novel with this many characters. But for the most part, the novel talks about or involves the relationships, dysfunctional relationships between these 10 people, or these 5 couples, and it goes through their couplings and their uncouplings and their recouplings, in some detail, and sometimes in some fairly graphic detail. But basically, it's a novel about people who've been in this group of friends in high school, who've experienced some traumas in their life, and are trying to kind of come to grips with what all that means and who they are as young people after high school. Steven Markley is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. He published a memoir before, which I think I've actually seen this memoir somewhere. It's called Publish This Book, The Unbelievable True Story of How I Wrote, Sold, and Published This Very Book. That's the name of his first book. And a travelogue called Tales of Iceland. But this is his first novel, and it's a pretty ambitious novel. There are a lot of things about it that I just find completely admirable. So the book is told in 4 main sections. There's a prologue, there's an epilogue, but the book is told in 4 main sections, and it's the story of the book, or the action of the book, is told by these four of the 10 characters. And while these four characters are certainly important characters in the novel, they're not necessarily the characters that drive the action around which the novel centers. And if that sounds confusing, then you kind of have to read, I think, Ohio to get a clear glimpse of all that. So section 1 is the story from the perspective of Bill Ashcraft. He was a high school basketball star, liberal. Kind of his politics kind of put him on the outs. He was friends with 2 other young men, Rick Brinklin and Ben Harrington, who's one of those young men's story is kind of pivotal to the action in the novel. That would be Rick Brinklin. Bill Ashcraft has become a drug addict, and he comes back to New Canaan on a mission for which he's been paid a fairly substantial sum of money to carry something from New Orleans back to his hometown in New Canaan. So section number 2 is told by a character named Stacy Moore. Stacy Moore is a lesbian, an academic, and she is brokenhearted and in some ways searching for her lost high school love, to find out what happened to her. Section 3 is told by a character named Dan Eaton. Dan Eaton served 3 tours of duty in the military. I believe he served in Afghanistan for 2 tours and in Iraq for 1 tour. He's been wounded physically, emotionally, psychologically, and he too is heartbroken and is looking for some kind of not necessarily reconciliation, but some kind of closure with his high school girlfriend and somebody he considered to be the love of his life. And then section number 4 is told by Tina Ross. Tina Ross is the abused girlfriend of the football star. She's led an incredibly difficult life, and she's at a point where she has accepted what her life's going to be, and she is looking for some kind of closure / revenge against the people who hurt her in high school. The story itself really focuses on 4 other characters. One is Rick Brinklin. He's also a high school football star, flawed, but somebody who, generally speaking, tries to do the right thing, and he is killed in Iraq while serving in the Marine Corps. His funeral creates kind of the opening scene of the novel, which I'll talk about more later. There's Kaylin Lynn. She's the local girl next door with an incredibly twisted, dark secret past, and who is oftentimes manipulative and mean as a snake. She's one of the pivotal characters in the story of the novel. There's Todd Beaufort. Todd, Tina's boyfriend, who is abusive. He's the local football star with a chance to go play at Ohio State as a linebacker, and his own weaknesses and his tendency to violence ruin that opportunity for him. And then there's Lisa Hahn, the local kind of cool girl, iconoclastic kid who reads a lot and acts tough, but really she is incredibly tender-hearted. I really can't talk a whole lot about the plot, I think, without unintentionally giving away some of the things that make reading the book really enjoyable. What I would say is that a lot of the key elements of the plot kind of unfold slowly and maybe for me somewhat unexpectedly. And there are a few plot twists in here, and there's a lot of there are a lot of strands in the plot. The plot touches on things like regret and violence, sexual relationships, rape, war, poverty, the collapse of American industry, drug epidemics in small towns, PTSD, the Iraq War, the war on terrorism, what else? Homophobia, high school cliques. I mean, you name it, it kind of focuses on a whole lot of things and brings in a whole lot of elements of life in the in the first decade, I think, of the 2000s. And in that way, it's really interesting. I think this is a really good book, and I really think people should read it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have some flaws. For me, there's a prologue in which the author kind of goes off in a detailed description, kind of riffing on all the things that have gone wrong in this small rural town in Ohio. And I think I don't necessarily think the prologue as a prologue was necessary, and I don't think a lot of that description was necessary either. Occasionally it feels like he is straining to create metaphors and similes that will be, eye-opening, enlightening, and seem cool and artistic. Sometimes I think he pushes too far in that direction. And then, as I said, there are a lot of characters in the novel, and as a result, I think some of them can be reduced to fairly simple stereotypes. Not that these kind of people don't exist, and that some of them just seem to exist so that characters that he wants to talk about have a love interest. I mentioned that as a flaw, but again, I think that's a part of the ambition of the novel. There are so many good things, though, in the novel to like. The pacing is great. The book and Markley has the ability to capture your interest really quickly. His writing style is a definite style, but you get used to it quickly, and it is one of those books that makes you want to keep reading. The novel is cleverly constructed and intricately constructed so that you learn a lot about characters who are not actually the ones telling the story, or from whom the story is not from their perspective, and the story kind of unfolds slowly in a really clever and intricate way that way. He creates an entire world, I think, in New Canaan, Ohio, which I'm not even sure I don't think is a real place. A community full of people, teachers and parents, the successful, the poor, the educated, the ignorant, and presents kind of a complete picture of small-town Ohio. That picture may be a little harsh. I know it's been criticized for being kind of perhaps looking down his nose at that kind of community, but there are admirable characters, and there are terrible characters in this small town, which is pretty much the way the world is. If anything, maybe he's desperate to cram every problem he can think of that exists in small-town Ohio into this one town, and every kind of stereotypical character or archetypal character into the novel. One of my favorite things about reading the book was just thinking of and feeling that the book reminded me of all kinds of other books that I've read. And really, that's kind of where I want to leave my discussion, is talking about the books that Ohio reminded me of. It reminded me of The Dog Soldiers by Robert Stone. Yeah. It reminded me of The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It reminded me sometimes of the movie Gone Girl. It reminded me of Tim O'Brien's The Thing They Carried. It reminded me of Jennifer Egan's Look at Me. And the conclusion, I thought, was the very concluding paragraph statement of the novel, I thought, was in some ways an attempt to, put an F. Scott Fitzgerald twist at the end of the novel to say something profound, in my opinion. The end of The Great Gatsby, the closing lines of The Great Gatsby, we beat on boats against the current, borne ceaselessly back into the past. I think that's the quote. It's one of the great closing lines in all of literature. So I think Markley's attempting something similar to that. So I'm just going to read the closing line and then leave my review at that. And they were gone, these infinitesimal creatures, walking the surface of time, trying and failing to articulate the dreams of ages, born and wandering across the lonesome heavens. So you see what I mean? It's not that he's directly kind of referencing F. Scott Fitzgerald, but there's clearly an attempt to create some larger meaning, or lack of meaning in this case, perhaps, out of the story. Anyway, I hope that review made sense, and I hope it makes you want to read Ohio, because I thought it was a good book, a very good book. Maybe not a great book, but a very good book. Anyway, thank you for watching. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below.